She walked into that ballroom worth $200 million, and they still found a way to make her feel like nothing. Not with their words, not at first, with their eyes. The quick glance down, the barely there smirk, the way conversations paused just long enough when she passed that she could feel it. That particular silence that isn't quiet at all. Brielle Hawthorne had built an empire from scratch. She had survived boardrooms full of men who didn't think she belonged, markets that tried to swallow her whole, and nights so dark she wasn't sure she'd make it to morning. But nothing prepares you for a room full of people in expensive clothes deciding you're a joke. If you've ever been judged for something you couldn't control, this story is for you. Stay with me until the very end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The invitation had arrived 6 weeks ago, printed on heavy cream cardstock with gold foil lettering that caught the light when you tilted it. The Blackwood Foundation Annual Charity Gala. Chicago Civic Opera House. Black tie. Brielle had propped it against her monitor and stared at it for 2 full days before she RSVP'd. She didn't want to go. She never wanted to go to these things. But Hartwell Capital was one of the gala's primary sponsors, and Hartwell Capital held 11% of Hawthorne Collective's outstanding shares. And Brielle had learned a long time ago that 11% had a way of becoming a very loud voice when you weren't in the room. So she went. Her driver dropped her off at 8:15, 15 minutes late because she'd sat in the car for an extra 10, doing that thing she did when she was nervous, checking her phone for emails that didn't need to be checked, making notes that didn't need to be made. Stalling. Ms. Hawthorne. Her driver, Gerald, had watched her do this enough times that he didn't comment anymore. He just held the door. "I know," she said, and got out. The Opera House steps were crowded with photographers and arriving guests, the women in floor-length gowns, the men in black tie, everyone moving with that particular ease that comes from a lifetime of rooms like this one. Brielle squared her shoulders and walked up. She was wearing a deep burgundy dress, custom-made, with a structured bodice and a skirt that moved when she walked. Her stylist had spent 3 hours on this. It was a good dress. She knew it was a good dress. She still felt every single glance as she climbed the steps. Not hostile exactly. Curiosity was harder to argue with than hostility. Curiosity said, "I'm just looking." It slid past before you could catch it. But Brielle had been in enough rooms to know the difference between someone looking at you and someone looking at you. Inside, the Opera House had been transformed into something from another era. Long tables draped in white linen, centerpieces of white orchids and gold candle holders, a string quartet playing near the far wall, the whole room glowing with the kind of soft amber light that made everyone look a little more beautiful than they actually were. Brielle took a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray. She didn't drink at events, hadn't since a charity dinner 3 years ago when a board member had photographed her mid-laugh with a wine glass and cropped it into something that looked like something else entirely, and began the quiet work of navigating the room. It was a specific kind of work, stopping at the right clusters of people, holding eye contact the right length of time, laughing at the right moments without laughing too much. Men like Gregory Hartwell didn't want to do business with a woman who was too eager or too cool, too hard, or too soft. They wanted her to hit a note that she'd spent 15 years learning to find and still sometimes missed. Brielle. Gregory Hartwell found her first, which was what she'd been counting on. Short, silver-haired, with the handshake of a man who'd been practicing it since prep school. "You look wonderful." "Gregory," she smiled, "thank you for the invitation." "Wouldn't be the same without you." He meant it as a compliment. She filed it away as information. "Have you met the Ashfords yet? David and Patricia, they're considering a significant position in the renewable energy sector. I thought you two might—" "I'd love to meet them," she said. And so it went. She was 40 minutes into the evening and had spoken to 9 people, none of whom she particularly liked, when she noticed the conversation happening 6 feet to her left. She wasn't supposed to hear it. The 2 women, late 40s, both in dark column gowns, both with the polished look of people who had married money and kept it, were speaking in the lowered voices of people who believe they're being subtle. They were not being subtle. "I heard she's worth $240, one of them said. "But I mean, doesn't she have people? Someone should have told her, it's not like it's bad, it's just, no, I know what you mean. There's just a point where you have to ask yourself, how much do you actually care about? Brielle had a drink of her sparkling water. She had been in enough rooms to know the note too. The careful pitch of her voice, the way she kept her face exactly still when she needed to, the specific stillness that looked like confidence from a distance and felt like nothing at all from the inside. She turned very slightly, just enough to look at neither woman directly, and moved on. The thing about being the target of that kind of attention was that it had a way of making you hyper-aware of everyone else's bodies, the way a group shifted when you approached, the brief moment of recalibration. Who is this? Do I know her? Do I need to be nice? Visible in their faces before the social training kicked in. Brielle had developed the habit of finding the edges of rooms, the spots where you could see without being seen quite so much. Near the bar, where people were focused on their drinks. Near the exits, where people were coming and going. Near the windows, where there was something else to look at. She'd found a spot near one of the tall arched windows that overlooked the river when she heard the crash. Not a dramatic crash. A quiet one. A glass tipping from a tray, a sound like a small bell, and then someone saying, "Oh, I'm so sorry," and the particular brief silence that opens up around an accident before the room swallows it again. She turned. A man was crouching on the floor beside a scattered tray, picking up the pieces of a broken champagne glass with a folded cocktail napkin. One of the catering staff was already moving toward him with a small brush and dustpan, saying it was fine, please don't worry, and the man was saying he absolutely should have been watching where he was going, that was completely his fault. And could he at least help? Sir, really, I feel terrible about this, I'm sorry. He stood up, handing the napkin with the glass pieces to the staff member with something that looked genuinely like embarrassment, and Brielle found herself paying attention to him in a way that surprised her. He was around her age, maybe a year or two older, dark hair that was slightly longer than the room standard, as though he'd meant to get a haircut but kept pushing it back, a tuxedo that fit reasonably well, but not the way expensive tuxedos fit, not like it had been made for him. He had the face of someone who hadn't slept quite enough and was trying to compensate with effort. High cheekbones, a jaw that was clean-shaven, dark eyes that were currently looking down at the floor where the champagne had spread with an expression she could only describe as, "This is exactly how this evening was going to go, wasn't it?" He looked up and caught her watching him. She should have looked away. She didn't. He said, "Tell me that wasn't as visible as it felt." "I'm afraid it was visible from where I was standing," Brielle said. "Great." He looked back at the floor for a moment, then at her. "How far away were you?" "Far enough to have deniability if you need me to swear I saw nothing." He let out a short, surprised laugh. Not polished, not the kind of laugh you performed in rooms like this, but the real kind. The kind that happened before you could arrange your face around it. "I'm going to need you to do that, yeah. I'm Mason Reed." "Brielle Hawthorne." He shook her hand the way people shook hands when they weren't thinking about it. Not too hard, not too soft, just a handshake. "Are you enjoying your evening, Brielle Hawthorne?" "I'm surviving it," she said, and then wondered why she'd said that, because she never said things like that to people she'd just met. "You?" "Currently at a net loss, glass-wise," he said, "but the night's young." They ended up talking for 45 minutes. It wasn't supposed to be 45 minutes. It started as two people standing near a window. The conversation, the natural kind that happens between people who are both slightly outside the room, both there because they had to be rather than because they wanted to be. Mason, it turned out, was there as the +1 of a client who had left 20 minutes earlier with a headache, which meant he was technically free to go, but had already paid for parking and felt it was wasteful not to stay for at least the dinner portion. "That is the most practical reason I've ever heard for staying at a charity gala," Brielle said. "I'm a practical guy." He picked up a small crab cake from a passing tray, looked at it, ate it. "Also, these are very good. What about you?" "I have a shareholder here." "That's a less fun reason." "Most of my reasons are less fun." He glanced at her, the way someone glances at you when you've said something that lands a little differently than small talk usually does. "What do you do?" She told him. She watched his face for the particular shift that sometimes happened when she answered that question. The recalibration, the change in temperature, The way some people got suddenly more interested and some people got suddenly less comfortable, and almost nobody stayed exactly the same. Mason Reed nodded slowly. Hawthorne Collective, he said. That's the logistics and supply chain company. You know it? My daughter did a school project on female CEOs last year. You were on her list. He paused. She's 9. She's very serious about her research. Brielle laughed before she could stop herself. It wasn't her professional laugh. Lower, shorter, the laugh that escaped when she wasn't watching for it. What did she conclude? That you seem like someone who doesn't have a lot of patience for people who waste time. He said it without apology. She said that like it was a compliment. I think she meant it as one. It is one, Brielle said. Yeah, I thought so. She looked at him for a moment. This man in his slightly wrong-fit tuxedo, who had broken a glass and asked her to lie about it, and was talking about his daughter's school project at a gala where everyone else was talking about tax structures and portfolio diversification. What do you do, Mason Reed? I'm an architect, he said. Residential, mostly. Some commercial. I run a small firm. A beat. We're very good. We're just not... He gestured. One brief gesture that took in the room, the string quartet, the orchids. That's not a bad thing. No, he agreed. It's mostly just a parking problem. She didn't notice the first time someone looked at them. She noticed the second time because it was the same woman, Patricia Ashford, David's wife, whom Gregory had introduced her to 40 minutes ago. And the look was the particular look that came before a whisper. Quick, deliberate, designed to be seen only by the person it was directed at. Brielle had a drink of her water. She stayed in the conversation, but she was aware of it now, the way you become aware of a sound in the background of a room once you've heard it. The low-level attention that had been building around them for the last 20 minutes. 2 people standing near a window, talking long enough and in a way that read as something other than professional. Chicago's charity circuit was a small world. Brielle had learned that early and remembered it constantly. People talked because talking was social currency, and social currency kept people warm and comfortable and invited to the next thing. She was a known quantity. Mason was not. And a known quantity standing next to an unknown one for 45 minutes was a sentence that people were going to want to finish for themselves. Can I ask you something? Mason said. Go ahead. Are the people behind you looking at us, or am I being paranoid? She didn't turn around. They've been looking for about 15 minutes. He absorbed this. Should I be concerned? That depends on whether you have a board of directors. I have 5 employees and a lease. Then you're fine, she said. I'm the one with the board of directors. He was quiet for a moment. There was something in his face that she couldn't quite read. A brief tightening, the look of someone running a calculation. Do you want me to move? He asked. I don't want to cause you... Mason. She said his name before she'd thought about saying it. I'm choosing to stand here. Nobody is making me stand here. He looked at her steadily. Okay, he said. Good. Dinner was called at 9. They were, naturally, seated at different tables. She had been placed between Gregory Hartwell and a city councilman whose name she kept forgetting and remembered every time she looked at his place card, and Mason had found his table somewhere in the middle distance. She told herself this was fine. It was fine. 45 minutes of conversation at an event was not a thing. People talked at events. That was what events were for. She was on her second course when she felt someone lean in from her left. The man you were talking to, Gregory said, in the smooth, even tone he used when he was being helpful in a way that wasn't helpful. Who is he? An architect, she said. His client is a friend of yours, I think. He mentioned Langford? Marcus Langford, yes. A pause. You seem to be getting along quite well. We had a nice conversation. The sound that meant something was coming. She waited. You know how people talk, Brielle. I know very well how people talk, Gregory. I only mean, he spread a hand, a gesture that managed to be simultaneously nothing and everything. You're very visible. The company is very visible right now. There's a lot of attention. Any kind of personal narrative that becomes a distraction? I appreciate your concern, Brielle said, in a tone that closed the subject. He got the tone. He turned back to his plate. Brielle cut into her salmon and looked at nothing in particular and reminded herself, as she had done many times and in many rooms, that she was not here to be liked. She was here because 11% had a voice, and her job was to manage that voice, and she was good at her job, and that was enough. Across the room, she could see Mason at his table. He was talking to the man beside him, gesturing slightly in the way people gestured when they were explaining something. He laughed at something. The same laugh. The real one. The one that happened before he could stop it. She looked down at her plate. After dinner, there was the auction. Items she didn't want, causes she would write a check for separately. The particular theater of competitive generosity that charity galas required. And then the room loosened, people moving again, the string quartet replaced by something with more tempo. She was considering whether she had covered the necessary ground with the necessary people and whether she could leave without it meaning something when she found Mason Reed standing beside her again. "Survived dinner?" he asked. Narrowly. She looked at him. "Your evening?" "The man next to me collects vintage motorcycles. I now know more about vintage motorcycles than I will ever need." He glanced at her. "Your shareholder fined you?" "Multiple times." "Good encounters?" "Functional ones." She paused. "He told me to be careful about being seen talking to you too long." The words were out before she'd processed whether she was going to say them. It wasn't like her. She was measured. She was always measured. Mason was quiet for a moment. "What did you say?" "That I appreciated his concern." He nodded slowly. There was something careful in his face, the look of someone choosing what to say rather than just saying it. "For what it's worth," he said, I'm not here trying to attach myself to anything. I'm just a guy whose client left him with a parking situation." "I know that," Brielle said. "I just wanted to say it." "You didn't have to." "Maybe not." He looked at her. "But I wanted to." She studied him for a moment. This man who had broken a glass and told her about his daughter's school project and asked if she wanted him to move and was now standing here telling her something he didn't owe her because he felt it was important to say. "Why did you come back over here, Mason?" He considered the question like it deserved a real answer. "Because I was having a better conversation over here than anywhere else in the room," he said. "And the night's almost over, so—" He shrugged, half awkward. Seemed worth it. Brielle was quiet for a long moment. "I have a standing rule," she said finally, "about not giving out my personal number at professional events." "That sounds like a smart rule." "It is a smart rule." She looked at him. "I'm going to give you my card anyway, if that's all right." Something in his face shifted. Not performance, just a quiet kind of warmth, the look of someone surprised by something they weren't expecting. "Yeah," he said. "That's all right." Out. She left at 10:40. Gerald was waiting at the bottom of the steps, the car idling. She got in, and he pulled away from the curb without comment, and she sat in the back and watched the river lights go past and felt the specific weight of an evening that had been something she hadn't planned for. Her phone buzzed. A text from her head of communications. Several photos circulating from tonight's gala. One or two of you in conversation with unknown male. Worth keeping an eye on. Below it, a link to one of the city's social media gossip accounts. She opened it. The photo wasn't bad, technically. She and Mason near the window, mid-conversation, the amber light doing what it did. The caption was 3 sentences that said less than what they implied. Spotted. Hawthorne Collective CEO. Brielle Hawthorne in deep conversation with Mystery Man at tonight's Blackwood Gala. While guests mingled, the billionaire businesswoman seemed thoroughly absorbed. Is there something in the water at the Opera House? 1,400 likes. The comments were already building. Some curious, some supportive, and some of the third kind that lived in comment sections and said the things that people didn't say to your face. She scrolled for 11 seconds, enough to understand the shape of it, and then she put her phone away. Outside, Chicago moved past the windows, the city doing what it always did. Indifferent, enormous, full of its own noise. The river caught the lights and broke them apart. She thought about a man who'd broken a glass and laughed like he meant it. She thought about a 9-year-old who'd included her on a list of serious women. She thought about Gregory Hartwell's hand spread on the table, managing her with the ease of long practice. She pulled out her card case. It was a slim silver thing, a gift from herself when the company crossed its first 100 million in revenue. She'd given Mason a card from it tonight, the matte black one with just her name and her direct number, the card she didn't give to people at professional events. She snapped the case shut. Her phone buzzed again. Different number, a number she hadn't seen before, so she nearly ignored it. Then she read it. This is Mason. I know texting the same night is not the move. I'm doing it anyway because my daughter asked me what I did tonight, and I told her about the gala, and she said, "Did you meet anyone interesting?" And I said, "Yes," and she said, "Did you get their number?" And I said, "Yes," and she said, "Good." She's 9, and she's correct. Thank you for the card. Brielle read it twice. She looked out the window at the city. She typed back, "Your daughter is the most sensible person either of us met tonight." 3 seconds later, "She really is. Good night, Brielle Hawthorne." She put the phone in her bag and looked out at the river. She wasn't smiling. She was too careful for that, too aware of the photos circulating and the comments building and Gregory Hartwell's steady, well-meaning management of who she was and who she ought to be. But there was something in her chest that was lighter than it had been 3 hours ago. She noticed it the way you noticed a window cracked open. The difference in air pressure, the small rush of something that wasn't the controlled, recycled air of closed rooms. She let it be opachat. The next week was the kind of week that left marks. It started Monday morning when her communications director forwarded her a column in the Chicago Business Review's digital edition. The headline read, "Hawthorne Collective's CEO, Brilliant Businesswoman or Lonely Billionaire." The piece was 6 paragraphs of what passed for analysis. Her company's numbers, her public profile, and then a pivot in paragraph 4 to speculation about the gala photograph that managed to be both vague and pointed. It quoted 2 unnamed industry observers. It included the phrase "questions about personal decisions" twice. She read it once, closed her laptop, and called her outside PR firm. "We don't respond," she said. "I agree," said Dana Reese, who had been managing Brielle's press for 4 years and had the unflappable quality of someone who had weathered worse. "Responding makes it a story. Right now it's a column. What's the reach? Moderate? It'll cycle through the business gossip feeds today, probably peak by Wednesday, then something else will happen and it'll die." "Good." She paused. "What do the board members know?" A brief silence. "Margaret Clifton called me this morning." Brielle closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. Margaret Clifton was 63 years old, had been on the Hawthorne Collective board for 6 years, and had the specific kind of interest in Brielle's personal life that dressed itself up as mentorship. What did she want? "She wants a call with you at your earliest convenience." Dana's voice was carefully neutral. She used the phrase perception management. Of course she did. Brielle looked at her calendar. "Put her at Thursday at 9. And Dana, if anyone else calls about this, the answer is no comment." "Understood." She hung up and sat for a moment in the particular quiet of her office, 42 floors above Michigan Avenue, the lake visible from here on clear days, gray and vast and completely indifferent to whatever was happening in the building around it. Her phone showed a text from Mason, sent an hour ago. "I know you're probably dealing with fallout this morning. No need to respond if you're busy. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry you have to deal with it." She thought about that for a moment. Then she typed, "I've dealt with worse. Are you free this week?" The answer came back in under a minute. "Thursday evening?" "Thursday works," she wrote back. "I'll have a board member's voice in my head, but I'll be there." A pause. Then, "I'll try to be interesting enough to drown her out." Brielle looked at her phone for a moment. Then she set it face down on her desk and went back to work. Thursday was dinner at a small Italian restaurant in Lincoln Park that Mason had chosen because, he explained when she arrived, he had asked his daughter to research good restaurants in Chicago, and Lily had produced a list of 7 with handwritten notes on each. She rated this one 4 stars, he said, pulling out her chair. What were her criteria? Pasta quality, whether the lighting was nice, her word, and whether the waiter seemed rushed. He sat across from her. She's very thorough. I like her already. The restaurant was the kind of place that had been there for 30 years. Red check tablecloths, low lighting, the smell of garlic and something roasting, no one trying to be anything other than what it was. Brielle hadn't been to a place like this in longer than she could easily remember. Her professional dinners happened at the kind of restaurants where the portions were small and the prices were large, and everyone spent as much energy reading the room as reading the menu. She picked up her menu and actually read it. "How bad was the week?" Mason asked. "Functional." She looked up. A board member called. My communications director earned her retainer. "I saw the column." He said it directly, without making it a thing. "I'm sorry, it was not a fair piece of writing." "Most things aren't." She looked at him. "Does it concern you? Being visible?" He took a breath. She watched him consider it, actually consider it, not just deflect. "I have a daughter," he said. "So yes, in the sense that I care about what she sees and what gets said around her." He paused. "But in the sense of people deciding what they think I'm doing or why I'm doing it, no. People are going to think what they want. That's not really in my control." "Some people would find that concerning," she said. "Some people spend a lot of energy on things that aren't in their control." He looked at her steadily. "You seem like someone who's had to think about this more than most." She had. She'd been thinking about it for 15 years. The specific calculation of how much of herself to show and when and to whom, the tax it charged, the way it had a way of becoming the only self you had left if you weren't careful. "I was told at 24 by the first man who invested in my company that I would need to choose," she said. "Between the career and everything else." He said it kindly. He meant it as advice. Mason was quiet. "I believed him for a long time," she said. The waiter came. They ordered. The evening opened up around them, easy and strange, the city doing what it did outside the windows. She thought, not for the first time and not for the last, that she had no idea what she was doing. She was 32 years old and worth $240 million, and she was sitting in a restaurant with 4-star lighting according to a 9-year-old's rating system, talking to a man in a not-quite-right tuxedo who had been replaced by a well-fitting jacket, and she had absolutely no idea how to be in this moment. But she stayed in it. That, for now, was the whole of it. 3 weeks after the gala, Mason asked if she wanted to meet Lily. He asked it on a Tuesday evening, over the phone, with the careful tone of someone who had been thinking about whether to ask. "I want you to know there's no pressure," he said. "She already knows you exist. That ship has sailed somewhat." "What does she know?" "That I met you at a boring work thing and that you're someone I'd like to be friends with." A pause. "She asked if you were pretty." "What did you say?" "I said you were very elegant, and she said that wasn't what she asked." He sounded both embarrassed and fond in equal measure. "She's 9. What did you say after that?" "I said yes." Brielle was quiet for a moment. "Saturday morning," she said, "I know a bookstore in Wicker Park that has a good children's section." A beat. "She's going to ask you questions." "Good," Brielle said. "I'll have answers ready." Lily Reed was 4'3", had her father's dark eyes and her late mother's stubborn chin. She would mention this herself within the first 20 minutes, matter-of-factly, as a piece of information, and wore her hair in a ponytail that was slightly too tight on the left side and slightly loose on the right because Mason had done it, and he was still learning. She shook Brielle's hand, formally, with 2 hands, the way someone had taught her. "My dad said you run a company," she said. "I do." "A big one?" "Medium big." Lily considered this. "How many people work for you?" "About 3,000. The 9-year-old nodded slowly, processing. "Do you like it?" "Most days," Brielle said. "Some days it's very hard. My dad says things worth doing are usually hard sometimes." She glanced back at Mason, who had found something very interesting to look at on a nearby shelf. "He says it about almost everything, so I think he just likes saying it." Brielle pressed her lips together to keep from smiling. "Probably," she agreed quietly. They spent 2 hours in the bookstore. Lily had opinions about everything, about the front-facing display choices, about which authors were overrated, about the fact that the fantasy section was too small relative to the mystery section, which wasn't fair. She picked out 3 books and made Brielle read the first page of each one before she'd commit. "This one," Lily said finally, holding out a middle-grade novel about a girl who builds a boat. "Good choice," Brielle said. Lily looked at her. "You actually read it," she said with the tone of someone who had expected to catch you pretending. "I did. Most adults just say, 'looks great,' and hand it back." "I'm not most adults," Brielle said. Lily studied her for a moment. That particular 9-year-old assessment that had no social filter in it, no performance, just a pair of dark eyes deciding whether something was true. Then she nodded once, as though reaching a verdict. "Okay," she said, and turned back to the shelf. On the sidewalk afterward, Mason walked beside her while Lily ran ahead to look at a dog tied to a bicycle rack. The morning was cold, the sky the particular flat gray of Chicago in early November. "She likes you," he said. "You can tell after 2 hours?" "She read you the first page of the boat book herself before you got to it. She doesn't do that with people she doesn't like." Brielle watched Lily crouch down to pet the dog with the focus of a very serious scientist. There was something in her chest, that same lightness from the car ride after the gala, but wider now, less contained. "She reminds me of someone," Brielle said. "Who?" She thought about it for a moment. About a girl in a narrow apartment in a city that wasn't this one, doing her homework at a kitchen table and making notes in the margins and deciding very firmly at 11 years old that she was going to be someone people couldn't ignore. "Me," she said. "A long time ago." Mason looked at her. He didn't say anything. He didn't fill the space with something easier, and she was grateful for that. The specific gratitude of a person who has spent too much time in rooms where silence was always being managed. They walked to the end of the block. Lily came running back, the dog apparently satisfied, the boat book tucked under her arm. "Can we get hot chocolate?" she asked Mason. "We can get hot chocolate," he said. "Can Brielle come?" He looked at Brielle. "I'd like that," Brielle said. Lily grabbed her hand without asking and started walking. Brielle looked down at the small fingers around hers and felt something shift in her chest with a force she hadn't prepared for. She kept walking, the 3 of them, through the gray November morning, heading towards something warm. The hot chocolate place became a Saturday thing. Not officially. Nobody said, "Let's make this a Saturday thing." It just happened the way some things happen. The second Saturday, Lily asked if Brielle was coming, and Mason said he wasn't sure. And Lily looked at him with the particular look of a 9-year-old who found adult uncertainty baffling. And he texted Brielle, and she was there by 10. By the 4th Saturday, Lily had a preferred table, window seat left side where she could watch the street. She always ordered the same thing, dark chocolate with exactly 1 marshmallow, because she'd decided that more than one made it too sweet, and this was a position she held with the conviction of someone 3 times her age. Brielle started keeping a granola bar in her bag because Lily always got hungry by 11, and Mason always forgot to bring snacks, and was always slightly chagrined about it. "You don't have to do that," he said the 3rd time she produced it. "I know," Brielle said. He looked at her for a moment. There was something in his face that he didn't say, and she didn't ask him to say it, and they both turned back to Lily, who was explaining to them at length why the fantasy section of the bookstore next door remained inadequate. The thing was, and Brielle understood this, turned it over in quieter moments when she was alone and allowed herself to think clearly. The thing was that she wasn't a person who did this. She was a person who managed her time and her exposure and her emotional real estate with the same precision she applied to everything else, because she'd learned young that opening the wrong doors let in things you couldn't put back. She'd had 2 relationships in her adult life that lasted longer than 6 months. One had ended because he couldn't handle the visibility that came with who she was. The other had ended because she couldn't handle the way he looked at what she'd built. Not at her, but at it. Always calculating the angle. She told herself after the second one that she was fine alone. And she was. She had her company, her work, her apartment with its lake view, and its clean lines and its complete lack of anyone else's opinions. She was fine. She was sitting in a cafe on a Saturday morning watching a 9-year-old draw a map of what a better organized bookstore would look like, and she was not fine in the best possible way, and she didn't know what to do with that. Mason caught her looking at Lily and looked at her in turn. "What?" he said. Nothing, she said. She's drawing a floor plan. He looked. Lily had produced a pen from her jacket pocket. She always had a pen, apparently, which was another thing Brielle found unreasonably endearing, and was sketching on a napkin with absolute focus. She does this, he said. Gets an idea, has to get it out. Architect's daughter. I guess. He was quiet for a moment, both of them watching Lily in the comfortable silence that had developed between them over the past weeks. The kind of silence that wasn't really silence because it was full of things that didn't need saying out loud. She hasn't done this with anyone in a long time, he said, his voice lower. Just relaxed like this, around someone new. Brielle looked at him. Her mom died when she was 5, he said simply, the way he always said hard things, without staging, without framing. It's been 4 years. She's okay. She's really okay, actually. She's a stronger person than most adults I know. But she's careful. She watches people. I know, Brielle said. She watched me for the entire first hour at the bookstore. She was deciding. I know, I didn't rush her. Mason looked at her steadily. No, he said. You didn't. The Saturday morning moved around them, the cafe warm against the November cold outside. Lily's pen making small scratching sounds on the napkin, and Brielle sat in the middle of it and thought, very clearly and with some alarm, I am in trouble. She stayed anyway. December came in fast and cold, the lake wind doing what it did, and the city folded inward the way it always did when the temperatures dropped. More coats, more scarves, the particular compressed energy of a place that refused to slow down regardless of the weather. Brielle's December was usually the worst month for it. Year-end board meetings, Q4 reviews, the performance evaluations she ran herself rather than delegating, because she trusted her own read of people more than anyone else's summary. This December had all of that, plus the lingering trail of the column and the subsequent pieces it had inspired, the small ecosystem of commentary that had grown up around a photograph of 2 people talking near a window. She'd stopped reading it, mostly. Dana managed what could be managed. The rest was noise. What she couldn't stop was the board. Margaret Clifton called again in the second week of December. Brielle took it standing at her window, the lake gray and hard below, the kind of day that made the city look like a photograph of itself. I want to preface this, Margaret said, by saying that I have enormous respect for everything you've built and the manner in which you've built it. I hear a but coming, Margaret. Not a but, a concern. Margaret's voice was measured, warm, specifically calibrated. She was good at this. There's been some conversation among the board about optics, not about you personally. It's always about me personally when it's about a woman, Brielle said, and was proud of how even her own voice stayed. A pause. That's fair. I won't pretend otherwise. What I'm saying is that the Q1 Roadshow is 8 weeks away. We have institutional investors we need to bring in. Certain narratives create friction. She paused again. I'm asking you to be thoughtful. I'm always thoughtful. I know you are. A beat. Is this someone serious, Brielle? She looked at the lake. She thought about Saturday mornings and a 9-year-old's floor plan drawn on a napkin and a man who said hard things plainly because he thought she deserved the plain version. That's not information I'm prepared to share with the board, Margaret. The silence that followed was short but expensive. Understood, Margaret said finally. Thursday's prep meeting. I'll see you then. Brielle hung up and stood at the window for a long moment. Then she called Mason. I have a board member managing me again, she said when he answered. Bad? Functional. She watched a boat move across the gray lake. She asked if it was serious. A pause on his end. What did you say? That it wasn't board business. He was quiet for a moment. She could hear him. Somewhere with background noise, maybe the office. Is it serious? He asked. Not pushing, just asking. She almost deflected. She had the deflection loaded, the smooth professional pivot that got her past personal questions and interviews and boardrooms and dinners with people who wanted to know things they hadn't earned. She had it ready. Yeah, she said. I think it is. A beat. Okay, he said, and the word had that weight to it again, the same weight as when he'd said it at the gala, the weight of something that was more than it looked. Good. What? The first comment that got back to Mason came through his business account. He told her about it on a Thursday evening in early January, over takeout at his kitchen table. The first time she'd been to his apartment, a third-floor walk-up in Andersonville with drafting tables and Lily's drawings taped to the refrigerator and the comfortable disorder of a space that was actually being lived in. Lily was at a sleepover at her school friend's house, which was why Brielle was here. Mason had made it clear, quietly, and without making it a formal rule, that Lily's space was Lily's space until they all knew where they were. The apartment was the kind of place that had its own logic, small by the standards of what Brielle was used to, but used with the eye of someone who understood space. The layout was smart. The light was good. Someone sent a message to the firm's inquiry inbox, he said, pulling his phone out and turning it toward her. I don't know who it is. Anonymous email. She read it. It wasn't long. It said, essentially that a man in his position should be aware of how it looked, attaching himself to a wealthy woman, using access, taking advantage of someone who was clearly emotionally vulnerable. It said it in careful language, the kind of careful that made it worse rather than better. She read it twice and set the phone down. There have been 3 others, he said. 1 to the firm's general number, 2 on the business Instagram. He leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed in the posture of someone who is keeping themselves steady. And Marcus Langford called me last week. Your client, former client now. He said he couldn't risk the association given the current media environment. He said it in a neutral voice, the voice of a man repeating something that cost him more than he was showing. He was a 20% revenue account. Brielle was quiet. I'm not telling you this so you'll feel responsible, Mason said quickly. I want to be very clear about that. I'm telling you because you should know, and because I don't think you and I should have secrets about things like this. She looked at him. There was something that could have been anger in her chest, or grief, or some complicated combination of things she didn't have a clean name for. Mason, I'm okay, he said. You lost a major client because of me. I lost a client because Marcus Langford decided a gossip column was more relevant to him than 4 years of good work. His voice was flat and precise. That's not about you, that's about him. That distinction doesn't pay your rent. No, he said, it doesn't. He looked at her steadily. But it's still true. She sat with that for a moment. She had been in business long enough to understand how collateral damage worked, the way a person adjacent to something difficult absorbed the difficulty whether they'd asked for it or not. She'd been the source of the damage before, had managed it, had written the apologies and made the calls and done the clinical repair work that came after. This was different. This was sitting across a kitchen table from someone who had been hurt because he'd chosen to be near her, and watching him hold it together because he didn't want her to feel guilty about it, and feeling guilty about it anyway. Tell me what I can do, she said. Nothing. He said it without hesitation. I'm not asking you to do anything. The firm is fine. It'll be tight for a quarter, but we have other accounts. We're not going under. He paused. What I want is to keep having Thursday dinners and Saturday mornings, and to not let whoever is sending anonymous messages to my inbox make decisions for us. He looked at her. If you're in, I'm in. That's the whole thing. Brielle looked at him across the kitchen table, in the warm, slightly cluttered apartment with Lily's drawings on the refrigerator and the drafting tables covered in blueprints and the takeout containers between them, and felt something in her chest press up against her ribs so hard she had to breathe through it. I'm in, she said. He nodded once. He picked up his chopsticks. Good, he said, and the word meant what it always meant when he said it, which was everything and nothing more needed to be added. January was when The Outside came in harder. A financial blog with a significant readership ran a piece, not a gossip piece, a financial piece, which was worse because it had the format of legitimacy, questioning Brielle's decision-making at the company level by way of discussing her personal life. It was written by a man whose byline she recognized, someone who had applied for a consulting contract with Hawthorne Collective 2 years ago and hadn't gotten it. She knew this because she'd had Dana pull the file. She read the piece twice and then did not read it again. The board called an emergency preparatory meeting the Friday before the Q1 roadshow. She sat at the head of the table and watched 8 faces manage their concern in 8 different ways and answered every question with the clarity and precision that had gotten her to this table in the first place. David Park, who'd been on the board since year 2 and was the person she trusted most among them, said afterward in the hallway quietly, "You know, this has nothing to do with the company's actual numbers." "I know," she said. "The roadshow is going to go fine." "I know that too." He looked at her. David was 51, Korean-American, had built and sold 2 companies before joining her board, and had the particular quality of never managing her. "How are you holding up?" "I'm holding up." "Brielle." She looked at him for a moment. "I'm tired," she said, which was the truest thing she'd said in a board context in months. "But I'm not wrong, and I'm not stopping, so the tired doesn't particularly matter." He nodded. "No," he said, "it doesn't." He started down the hall, then stopped. "For what it's worth, the firm I used to run, my wife sat in the front row of every public meeting for 3 years while people told her I was using her socially. She had an MBA from Wharton and was building her own practice. People see what they want to see." He walked away, and Brielle stood in the hallway for a moment, and then she went back to work. The worst came on a Tuesday afternoon in late January, and it came from a direction she hadn't fully prepared for. She and Mason had been together, officially, privately, in the way that mattered, for 8 weeks when his sister called him. He mentioned it afterward, on the phone, with the careful voice he used when something had knocked him off balance and he was reassembling. His sister Kara, 3 years older, protective in the way older siblings were protective, had read the blog piece and the column and the comments, and had called to tell him, with love, that she was worried. "She said she doesn't want to see me get used," he said. "What did you say?" "I said she was reading things that were written by people who don't know us." A pause. "She said she'd read enough to form a picture." Brielle was quiet. There was a specific kind of hurt in being the picture someone's sister had formed. She'd had practice with a lot of kinds of hurt, but this one sat differently. "What does the picture look like?" she asked, because she needed to know. He was quiet for a long moment. "She thinks you're a woman who's used to getting what she wants," he said carefully, "and that Lily and I are a project, something to complete." He stopped. "I want to be clear that I told her she was wrong." "But she's not the only one who thinks it," Brielle said. "No, she's not." She sat with that. She was 32 years old, and she had built a company from nothing, and she had learned to absorb a certain amount of being misread, because being misread was the tax on being visible, and she had paid it and kept going. But there was a difference between being misread by people who didn't know her and being misread by people who mattered to someone she cared about. "I'm not a project," she said, and her voice came out quieter than she'd intended, with an edge in it she hadn't planned. "And Lily is not—" She stopped. "I need you to know that." "I do know that," Mason said, immediately and fully. "Brielle, I know." "Say it to your sister," she said. "I already did." Another pause. "She needs time. She'll come around." "You don't know that." "No," he admitted. "But I know her, and I know she loves me, and I know she'll eventually decide to look at what's actually in front of her instead of what the internet told her to see." His voice settled into that steadiness she'd come to rely on, the particular quality of a person who had learned in hard circumstances how to stay planted. "I'm not asking you to prove anything to her. That's not your job." She almost said, "It feels like my job." She didn't, because she recognized that feeling. The reflex of a woman who'd spent years believing that every room's verdict on her was her responsibility to correct. She was trying, imperfectly and in the middle of everything else, to stop giving that reflex the wheel. "Okay," she said instead. "Okay," he echoed. It was Lily who found the comment. She'd been doing homework at the kitchen table in late February, a Saturday. Brielle there for the afternoon, the 3 of them in the loose, ordinary rhythm they'd found, when she went quiet in the particular way that meant she'd found something that was bothering her, and hadn't decided yet whether to say it. Mason noticed first. "Lil." She looked up. Her face was doing that thing it did when she was controlling something, the chin set, the eyes careful. "Someone said something mean about Brielle," she said. The room got quiet. Online? Mason asked. Mia's older sister showed her and Mia told me at school. She looked at Brielle directly, the way she'd looked at her that first day at the bookstore, assessing, unfiltered. She said someone wrote that Brielle was embarrassing and that my dad should know better. A beat. She thought I should know. Brielle held very still. Mason said, Lily, people say things online that… I know, Lily said, with the weight of a child who had already had to learn more about how the world worked than she should have at 9. I know it's not true, I just… She stopped. She looked at Brielle. Are you okay? It took Brielle a moment to answer because the question, that direct, uncomplicated, completely sincere question from this small person who had decided some weeks ago to hand her a piece of trust she hadn't asked for, hit her somewhere behind the sternum with more force than she knew how to prepare for. Yeah, she said, and was surprised by how steady her own voice came out. I'm okay. Lily looked at her for another moment, deciding. Then she nodded, apparently satisfied, and went back to her homework. Mason met Brielle's eyes across the table. He didn't say anything. Neither did she. Lily's pen scratched against paper. The apartment settled around the three of them. Outside, February moved past the windows, cold and indifferent, doing what it always did. Later, after Lily was in bed and Mason walked Brielle down to the street to wait for her car, he said, very quietly, She asked me last week if you were going to stay. Brielle looked at him. I told her I hoped so. He shoved his hands into his jacket pockets. His breath made small clouds in the cold air. I told her it wasn't something I could promise for someone else. She said that was a very dad answer. He half smiled, the rueful kind. She's not wrong. Her car was pulling up at the curb. She looked at him. This man who had broken a glass and laughed honestly and told her hard things plainly and lost a client and absorbed the noise and stood in the cold outside his building to walk her to her car. And she felt the thing in her chest that she'd been carefully not naming for months press against her ribs again, the same as always, except bigger now and less inclined to be managed. Tell her yes, Brielle said. He looked at her. Tell her I'm staying, she said. That's not a promise for someone else. That's a promise I'm making. She held his gaze. Tell her. He looked at her for a long moment in the cold February air, and his face did the thing it did when something mattered, and he wasn't going to perform a reaction to it. Just absorbed it, held it, let it be real. Okay, he said. She got in the car. She didn't look back because she didn't need to. For the first time in as long as she could remember, she knew exactly where she'd left something important, and she knew it was going to be there when she came back. Spring came to Chicago the way it always did, reluctantly, in stages, with cold snapping back just when you thought it was done. But by April, the lake had shifted color, from the flat winter gray to something deeper and less certain, and the city moved differently, people outside again, the particular loosening that happened when the cold finally let go. Brielle and Mason had been together for 5 months. Not publicly, not in any announced way, not in any way she had sanctioned or staged, but in the way that things become real before anyone decides to name them. Lily had started texting her directly, short messages with no punctuation, things like, "We're going to the farmer's market Saturday. Are you coming? And I finished the boat book." It was good, you should read it. Mason had a key to her building's side entrance, left with the overnight security staff, for the Saturdays when he picked up coffee on the way. She had stopped checking the gossip accounts. Dana managed what needed managing. The board had their Q1 roadshow, which went well, which was what Brielle had told them it would do, and afterward Margaret Clifton had sent a brief email that was as close to an acknowledgement as Margaret got. Life had settled into something. Not perfect, never perfect. Mason was still rebuilding the revenue gap that Langford's exit had left, and there were weeks when she could hear the strain in his voice on the phone, even when he was trying not to let her hear it. She'd offered to help, twice, and he'd declined. Twice, with the particular careful tone of a man managing his pride and knowing it and doing it anyway. She didn't push. She understood the shape of it. What she didn't tell him, what she hadn't told almost anyone, was that since November she'd been tired in a way that she couldn't entirely account for. It wasn't new tired. That was the thing. She'd felt it before. The heavy mornings, The headaches that arrived behind her eyes in the late afternoon, the way she sometimes lost the thread of a sentence mid-meeting and had to reconstruct it from context. She'd attributed it to workload, to the board pressure, to the months of low-level stress that came from having your personal life publicly dissected while simultaneously trying to run a 3,000-person company. She'd attributed it to a lot of things, carefully and deliberately, because the alternative was to attribute it to something she'd been managing for 4 years and had gotten very good at not looking at directly. Her cardiologist's name was Dr. Sandra Obese. Brielle had been her patient since she was 28, when a routine physical had turned up something that required monitoring and management and the kind of ongoing conversation with a specialist that Brielle had structured her life around not having to have. She saw Dr. Obese twice a year. She took the medications. She did the things she was supposed to do. She had not told Dr. Obese about the November tiredness, or the December headaches, or the fact that twice in January she had stood up too fast and had to put a hand on her desk and wait for the world to stop tilting. She made the appointment in April after a morning when she'd been in the middle of a presentation to her senior leadership team and had felt, briefly, just for a moment, gone from herself in a way that frightened her, in the specific way that things you've been avoiding frighten you when they finally arrive. She'd finished the presentation. Nobody had noticed. She'd gone back to her office and called Dr. Obi's assistant and made the appointment for Thursday. She didn't tell Mason. She told herself this was because it was probably nothing, a recalibration of medication, an adjustment to her monitoring protocol. She'd been here before, in small ways, and she'd handled it and kept going, and there was no reason to worry anyone over what was probably a manageable correction. She told herself this with considerable conviction and almost believed it. The Hartwell Capital Shareholder Summit was the largest investor event on Hawthorne Collective's annual calendar, 2 days at the Langham Hotel, presentations and panels, and the formal dinner on the second evening that served as the social anchor for the whole thing. Brielle had been preparing for it since January. The numbers were strong, the narrative was clear, and she had run the presentation with her team 4 times and knew it cold. The summit ran Thursday and Friday. She saw Dr. Obese on the Wednesday before. She sat in the examination room in the particular paper gown that had never gotten less undignified and answered Dr. Obi's questions, and watched her doctor's face do the careful, controlled thing that medical faces did when they were processing something they didn't want to transmit yet. Sandra Obese was 55, meticulous, the kind of doctor who used precise language because she respected her patients enough to give them the actual words. She'd been that way for 7 years, and Brielle had always been grateful for it. She was less grateful for it today. "I want to run additional tests," Dr. Obese said. "Some of what you're describing is consistent with what we discussed as a possible progression risk. The fatigue pattern, the episodes of, you said, losing the thread. Briefly," Brielle said, "briefly is still a data point." Dr. Obese set her clipboard down. "Brielle, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer it honestly, not strategically." Brielle looked at her. "How long have you been feeling this way?" The room was very quiet. "November," she said. Dr. Obese held her gaze for a moment, and in it Brielle saw the precise calculation of a doctor deciding how hard to come down on a patient who has done the thing patients were not supposed to do. "November," she repeated. "I thought it was stress." "You knew it might not be." She looked at her hands. "Yes," she said, "I knew it might not be." "Doctor." Obese was quiet for a moment. Then she picked her clipboard back up, not unkindly. "The tests will take a week for full results. In the meantime, I'm adjusting your medication, and I want you on reduced physical exertion, light schedule where possible." She looked at Brielle over her glasses. "I know that's not something you're going to fully comply with. I have a 2-day summit starting tomorrow." "I know." A beat. "I'm not telling you not to work. I'm telling you to be smart about it. Sit when you can. Hydrate. If at any point you feel the way you described, the dissociation, the dizziness, I want you to stop what you're doing immediately. Not finish the sentence, not complete the presentation. Stop." Brielle nodded. "And I want you to tell someone," Dr. Obese said, "someone who will be with you at the event. Not for medical reasons, for practical ones. Someone who knows what to watch for." She drove back to her office thinking about what someone meant. Her communications director would tell the board. Her assistant would manage it efficiently and gently and it would still be in 5 people's inboxes by the end of the day. There were no pockets in her professional life that didn't have some connection to the larger infrastructure of the company. She thought about Mason. She thought about how she'd told herself she wasn't going to tell Mason because it was probably nothing, and how Dr. Obi had said November back to her like a question, and how she hadn't been able to fully argue with what it contained. She drove past his office on the way to hers. She did not stop. She went to her desk and worked until 7 and drove home and stood at her window for a long time watching the lake in the dark and thought about what it meant to tell someone something you'd been carrying alone for months and whether she knew how to do that anymore and whether she was brave enough to try. She was not sure of the answer. She was less sure than she'd been about almost anything. The first day of the summit went well. She was good at this. She'd always been good at this. The room command, the narrative arc of a presentation, the specific balance of data and story that kept institutional investors engaged rather than watching their phones. She stood at the podium in the ballroom of the Langham and spoke for 40 minutes without notes and answered questions for another 25 and came off the stage to David Park saying quietly, "That was the best I've heard you do it." "Thank you," she said, and went to find a chair and a glass of water. The afternoon was panels and breakout sessions, and she moved through them steadily, managing the tiredness that was sitting at the base of her skull with the technique she'd developed over months. Not fighting it, not feeding it, just acknowledging it and setting it aside and doing the next thing. Mason texted at 3. "How's it going?" She typed back, "Strong." "How's Lily?" "Cranky. She has a math test tomorrow she hasn't studied enough for and is taking it out on the concept of fractions. Tell her fractions are foundational. She'll use them forever." I told her that and she said, "For what?" And I couldn't think of a specific example fast enough, and now she thinks she's won. Brielle smiled at her phone in the hallway outside the breakout session. The tiredness was still there. But so was this. This small, ordinary exchange, this proof of life in the middle of the managed theater of the summit. "Good luck tonight," Mason texted. "You've got it." She put the phone away and went back in. The second day's centerpiece was the formal shareholder presentation, the one that mattered most. The one with the numbers and the 5-year projections and the strategic roadmap that Brielle had been building since Q3. The ballroom was fuller than the day before. The investor tables arranged in the horseshoe formation that the Langham used for these events. 300 people in the room, the weight of significant money paying attention. She'd slept badly. Not unusually badly. The way she always slept the night before something large. The particular restless quality of a mind that wouldn't fully let go. She'd woken at 5:30, had coffee, reviewed the presentation once more, and stood at the hotel window watching the lake turn from dark to gray. She'd felt okay. Tired, but okay. She felt okay through the morning sessions. She felt okay through the lunch break, though she ate less than she meant to because her appetite had been uneven for weeks. She felt okay standing in the wings while her CFO gave the financial overview that preceded her section. She walked to the podium at 2:15, and the room settled in that particular way rooms settled when they were waiting for the person who mattered. She was 12 minutes in when it happened. She was mid-sentence. Projections for the Eastern Regional expansion, the numbers she knew cold, the story she'd told 4 times in rehearsal. When the room did something wrong. Not the room. Something in her. A shift, a wrongness. The edges of things softening in a way they shouldn't. And the word she'd been reaching for, infrastructure, a word she'd said 1,000 times, went briefly somewhere she couldn't follow it. She paused. 1 second, maybe 2. She found the word, she said it, she kept going. But in those 2 seconds, something had happened in her body that she recognized and had been afraid of recognizing and had been trying not to recognize for 5 months. And she knew with the clear, cold certainty of a person who had been managing a thing long enough to know what it felt like when it stopped cooperating. She knew this was not stress. She finished the sentence. She finished the paragraph. She turned to the next slide. She made it to minute 19. Later, people would describe it in different ways. Some said she simply stopped. Some said she reached for the podium and missed. Her CFO, who was sitting closest to the stage, said she saw Brielle's hand come up. Not dramatically, just the reflexive reach of someone trying to steady themselves. And then she was on the floor, and the room had the stunned, fractured quality of a moment that nobody had prepared for. She didn't lose consciousness. That was important to her later for reasons she couldn't fully explain, as though staying present through the worst of it was the last piece of control she could hold. She was on the floor beside the podium, and there were hands, voices, someone saying her name, and she was looking at the ceiling of the Langham Ballroom, and she was thinking with bizarre clarity, I should have told him. The hospital was Northwestern Memorial, 6 minutes from the Langham by ambulance. Dr. Obie met her there, having been called by Brielle's assistant, who'd been sitting in the back of the ballroom and had Dr. Obie's number in her emergency contacts file because Brielle had put it there 2 years ago and never told anyone why. The test took the rest of the afternoon. Mason arrived at 5:47, which meant someone had called him, which she later learned was her assistant again. Practical, efficient, devastating. He came into the room and stopped at the door for a moment, the way people stopped when they were adjusting to something they'd been afraid of since the phone rang. He looked at her in the bed, the monitors, the IV line in her arm, and his face did something she hadn't seen it do before. A brief, unguarded fracture, there and gone, the crack in the composure of a person who had already lost one person in a hospital and understood what rooms like this one meant. He crossed to her. He sat in the chair beside the bed without being asked. He took her hand, not gently, firmly, the way you held something you were not going to let go of. Hey, he said. Hey. Her voice came out rougher than she expected. Who called you? Your assistant. She said to come. A pause. She was right. Brielle looked at the ceiling for a moment. I should have told you, she said. Yeah. His voice was quiet and even. You should have. She turned her head to look at him. She expected, she'd been bracing for, in the way she braced for things, the particular management of impact, anger, or hurt, or the careful withdrawal of someone who had decided the math didn't work. She'd built scenarios in the waiting for tests hours of how this conversation would go and how she would handle it and what she would say. What she saw in his face was none of those things. It was the steady, set expression of a man who was present and intended to stay present and was not going to have a reaction at her expense when she was lying in a hospital bed with an IV in her arm. Tell me now, he said. All of it. So she did. 4 years. The initial diagnosis, hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, a thickening of the heart muscle that had been caught early and managed carefully and had, until recently, allowed her to live at the speed she lived at without significant limitation. The medications, the twice-yearly monitoring, the risk factors she managed and the ones she couldn't, the conversation she'd had 4 years ago with Dr. Obie about what a progression event might look like, which was what today appeared to have been. She told him about November, about the headaches and the dizziness and the moment in the leadership meeting when she'd lost the thread, about the appointment with Dr. Obie on Wednesday, and the medication adjustment and doctor, Obie saying tell someone and her driving past his office without stopping. She told him all of it in the flat, factual voice she used when she was managing herself. And he listened to all of it without interrupting, his hand still around hers, his face still holding that expression of present and steady and not going anywhere. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Why didn't you tell me in November? He asked. Not accusing, just asking. She thought about the real answer, not the strategic answer, not the managed one. Because telling you made it real, she said. And I didn't want it to be real. And I didn't want to be... She stopped. I didn't want you to look at me differently. How did you think I'd look at you? Like something that might break. He was quiet for another moment. His thumb moved across her knuckle, once. You've been running a company and managing a board and dealing with everything that's happened since November, he said, with this in the background the whole time. Yes. Alone. Yes. He let out a slow breath. Not angry. Something else, and the sound of someone absorbing the full weight of something and deciding what to do with it. Okay, he said. We're not doing that anymore. She looked at him. Mason, I'm not asking, he said quietly. We're not doing that anymore. You don't carry this alone. That's not a negotiation. Her throat did something inconvenient. She was not a person who cried in front of people. had trained it out of herself years ago in rooms where showing that kind of vulnerability meant losing something. But there was something about the specific simplicity of what he'd just said, the complete absence of conditions or performance in it, that pressed against something she'd been holding together for a very long time. "Okay," she said. "Doctor." Obie came in at 7. She was direct and clear, the way she always was. The collapse had been a significant arrhythmia episode, consistent with the progression pattern they'd been watching. The medication adjustment was not sufficient. They were looking at more aggressive management, possibly a procedure, and a significant reduction in workload for the foreseeable future. "How significant?" Brielle asked. Dr. Obie looked at her. "Complete rest for a minimum of 3 weeks, then a graduated return, with close monitoring, subject to how you respond to the new protocol." She paused. "I want to be clear with you, Brielle. This isn't a warning shot you can absorb and adjust and keep going. This is your body telling you it needs something different from what you've been giving it." The room was very quiet. Mason, in the chair beside the bed, said nothing. He was still holding her hand. "The company," Brielle started. "Will manage," Dr. Obie said. "Companies have leadership teams. The board is going to... I understand there are professional implications. I'm your doctor, not your board." Dr. Obie's voice was firm and kind in equal measure. "My job is to tell you what your body needs. What you do with that is yours to decide. But I need you to understand what the alternative looks like if you don't." She understood. She'd understood since November, in the quiet underneath all the careful attributions to stress and workload. She'd understood, and she'd chosen not to understand, and the bill for that choice had come due in front of 300 investors in the Langham ballroom. After Dr. Obie left, the room was quiet for a long time. Through the window, Chicago was doing what it always did. Indifferent, enormous, full of its own noise, the lake somewhere beyond the hospital buildings, dark by now. "Lily," Brielle said finally. "She's with my neighbor," Mason said. "She's fine. You should go be with her." "She's fine," he repeated. "She's watching a movie and eating cereal for dinner, which she's been trying to get away with for 6 months, so she's actually thriving." He looked at her. "I'm staying." "You don't have to us, Brielle." He said her name the way he said it when she was doing the things she did. Managing, deflecting, offering exits she didn't actually want taken. Just her name, flat and clear and full of the particular patience of someone who had decided to know her. "I'm staying." She closed her eyes. She was tired in a way that went past performance, past management, past the held-together quality she'd been maintaining for months. She was tired all the way down. "Okay," she said. For the second time that day, to the same person. "Okay." Outside the window, the city moved on. In the Langham ballroom, she imagined, the summit was concluding, her CFO managing the aftermath with the competence Brielle had spent years cultivating in her team. The investors were talking. The board was calling Dana. The machine was doing what machines did. And she was here, in a hospital bed, with a man who was staying, and for the first time in as long as she could remember, she was not calculating the cost of letting someone stay. She let herself be tired. She let the room be what it was. She let him hold her hand in the dark while the city moved past the window, and she thought about all the months she'd carried this alone, all the careful management, all the rooms she'd moved through while this lived underneath everything, and she thought, no more. Whatever came next, the board, the company, the procedure, the 3 weeks of rest that felt impossible and necessary in equal measure, whatever came next, she was not going to carry it alone. She held that thought until sleep finally took her, slow and complete, the first real sleep she'd had in months. She came home from the hospital on a Sunday. Not her home, Mason's. This was a decision that happened without being made, the way some decisions happen between people who had stopped pretending they weren't in each other's lives. Dr. Obie had said complete rest, which meant no working from the 42nd floor with the lake view and the clean lines and nobody else's opinion in the room. Mason had said she could stay in his spare room, practically, without ceremony, the way he said most things. Lily had texted her a single message that said the couch is really comfortable and I will bring you snacks, and that had settled it. She spent the first 3 days sleeping in a way she hadn't slept in years. Heavy, full, the kind of sleep that felt like her body finally had permission. When she was awake, she lay in the spare room, which had a drafting table in the corner covered in old blueprints and a window that looked onto a courtyard and the particular quality of morning light that older Chicago buildings had. And she looked at the ceiling and tried to learn how to be still. She was not good at it. She was, in fact, terrible at it. "You're doing the thing," Mason said on the third morning, appearing in the doorway with coffee. "What thing?" "The thing where you're lying down but your brain is running a board meeting." He handed her the mug. "I can see it from here. My CFO sent 3 emails this morning. Dana is handling your CFO. Dana is communications, not operations. David Park is handling operations. Your COO is handling operations. You have a leadership team that you've spent 8 years building specifically for situations where you can't be in the room." He sat on the edge of the chair by the window. "You know this." She knew this. She hated it. "The Vericore deal is being managed. Won't close if I'm not personally. Brielle." He looked at her calmly. "You were in a hospital bed 4 days ago. The Vericore deal can wait 2 weeks. She looked at her coffee. "You're very bossy for someone who is technically a guest in his own apartment." "It's my apartment. I'm not a guest." "I meant I'm the guest." "You're not a guest either." He said it simply, the way he said things that were important to him, without underlining them, without making sure she'd noticed. Just said it and let it sit. He stood up. "Lily wants to know if you want pancakes." She looked at him. "Is she making them, or are you?" "She is, under supervision." "That's a yes to pancakes," Brielle said. He almost smiled. He left. She sat with her coffee in the morning light and thought about what not a guest meant, and what it felt like to be somewhere that wasn't hers, and feel, against all logical expectation, like she was in the right place. So, the board called on the 5th day. She'd known they would. Dana had been managing the initial communications, the careful public statement about Brielle experiencing a health episode and taking a period of medical leave, the language calibrated to say everything and nothing simultaneously. The stock had dipped 4% on the Monday after the summit. She'd seen it on her phone before Mason had very gently suggested she not check stock prices before she'd had breakfast. It was Margaret who called, which was expected. What wasn't entirely expected was that Margaret called her directly, rather than going through Dana, at 8 in the morning, with the tone of a woman who had decided to drop something. "I want you to know," Margaret said, without preamble, "that the board's primary concern is your health." "I appreciate that, Margaret. I also want to be honest with you, because I think you deserve honesty more than you deserve management." A pause. Brielle waited. "There are 2 members of the board who are considering calling an emergency governance review. They're framing it as a continuity question, but what they actually want is to discuss whether you should step back temporarily and install an interim CEO while you recover." The room went very quiet inside Brielle's chest. "Who?" she said. "I won't tell you that on the phone. What I'll tell you is that I don't agree with them, and David doesn't agree with them, and we have the votes to block it, for now. But I need you to understand what's moving in that room." "I understand." "Your recovery is the most important thing," Margaret said, and Brielle heard, underneath the board speak, something that might have been genuine. "But you need to be visible, not working. I'm not asking you to violate Dr. Obi's orders. Visible. Your team needs to hear from you. The investors need to know you're present. A brief video message to the all company. Something." She thought about Dr. Obi's 3 weeks. She thought about the spare room with the drafting table and the morning light. She thought about the 2 board members she would identify by the end of the day through the process of elimination. She'd been running companies long enough to run in her sleep. "I'll do the all-company message," she said. "From here. I'm not going into the office. From there's fine." A beat. "Are you somewhere safe?" The question surprised her. It shouldn't have. Margaret, whatever her shortcomings as a confidant, was a woman who had navigated institutions for 40 years and knew what somewhere safe meant when a woman was having a health crisis. "Yes," Brielle said. "I am." "Good." Something shifted in Margaret's voice, brief and then gone. "Take care of yourself, Brielle. I mean that." She hung up and sat for a moment, and then she called David Park. "Tell me who they are," she said. He told her. She wasn't surprised by either name. She was angry, which was more useful than surprise. "I need 3 weeks," she said. "I know." "Can you hold them for 3 weeks?" "With Margaret's help, yes." A pause. "You know what happens at the end of 3 weeks. You need to come back strong, Brielle. Not just present, strong." "I know." "Your team is solid. Your numbers are solid. The story of this company is not a governance question. It's a continuity question. And the answer to continuity is you walking back in that door looking like yourself." Another pause. "Rest, recover, come back." She hung up and looked at the courtyard through the window for a long moment. Then she got up, slowly, the way Dr. Obie had told her to, no sudden movements, and went to find Mason. He was in the kitchen, reading something on his laptop, a second coffee at his elbow. He looked up when she came in. "2 board members want to install an interim CEO, she said. He looked at her steadily. "How much time do you have?" 3 weeks, if I come back strong." "Then that's the plan." He said it without drama, without padding, just the fact of it, simple and direct, and she sat down across from him at the kitchen table and felt the anger settle into something more workable, more like fuel. "I need to record a message to the company today," she said. "From here. I don't want them to see the hospital. I don't want them to see struggle. We can set something up in the living room. The light's good in the afternoon." He paused. "What do you want to say?" She thought about it. She thought about 3,000 people who showed up every day for a company she'd built, who had contracts and mortgages and families, and whose stability was connected to whether the board decided she was still the right person to run the place. She thought about what she would want to hear if she were them. "The truth," she said. "Not all of it, but enough, Oz." The video went to the all company at 4 that afternoon. She sat in front of the window with the afternoon light behind her. No styling, no backdrop, just a white shirt and her face in what she'd written out by hand that morning and then set aside because she knew she couldn't read from paper and sound like herself. She told them she'd had a health episode. She told them it was being managed and she was in recovery. She told them the leadership team was running the company with her full confidence, which was true, and she told them she would be back, which was also true and was the one thing she needed them to know most. She was on camera for 4 minutes. She did not cry, did not waver, did not use the soft language of crisis management that said everything in a register of apology. She spoke to them the way she'd always spoken to them, which was directly, as though they were capable of handling what was real. She sent it to Dana to distribute and then sat in the quiet of the living room for a while. Mason appeared with a glass of water. He set it on the table beside her. He'd watched the recording from across the room and hadn't said anything while she was doing it, which was what she'd needed. "Good?" she asked. "Very good," he said. "They'll feel that." The worst of it came 12 days into her leave, on a Wednesday evening. She'd been doing better. The new medication protocol was working. The monitoring was stable. Dr. Obie had visited twice and said the numbers were moving in the right direction. She'd been sleeping. She'd eaten actual meals. She'd sat on Mason's couch with Lily for 3 evenings in a row, watching a nature documentary series that Lily was passionate about, and Brielle had come to find genuinely interesting. She'd been feeling, for the first time in months, like she was on the right side of something. And then the Vericore story broke. It wasn't a news story. It was a targeted leak. She knew it was a leak the moment Dana called at 7 in the evening with the particular tone of someone managing something that had come from inside the house. A financial blog had published an inside account of the Hawthorne Collective Board situation, naming the governance concerns, quoting a source described as a board-level insider, framing Brielle's health episode as evidence of a leadership structure that had been dangerously overconcentrated in a single person. And then, woven through the piece, the other thread, the one that had been dormant since January, picked back up and sharpened. The speculation about her personal life, her judgment, the suggestion that a CEO who had made the choices she'd made in her personal circumstances while concealing a significant health condition was someone whose decision-making deserved scrutiny. She read it on her phone in the kitchen, standing, Mason at the table behind her. She read it twice. She set the phone face down on the counter. "I know which one of them it was," she said. Mason said nothing. She could feel him being still behind her. I've been managing this board for 6 years, she said. I've managed the optics and the politics and the external narrative, and I've done it while building a company that has grown every single year since we went public. Her voice was steady, but there was something underneath it that wasn't. And there is a man on my board who decided that the week I'm in medical recovery is the correct moment to feed a story to a financial blog. Brielle, I should have anticipated it. She picked up her phone again, put it back down. I knew what he was. I kept him because he had relationships I needed. That was my calculation, and I made it, and now... She stopped. The kitchen was quiet. Outside, Chicago was doing its thing, traffic and wind and the city's constant forward motion, indifferent to any particular person's particular disaster. Come sit down, Mason said. I know you're not upset. His voice was even. You're angry, and you're calculating, and your blood pressure is doing things Dr. Obi told you not to let it do. Come sit down. She turned around. He was looking at her from across the kitchen with the expression she'd come to know. The patient, immovable look of a man who had decided something and was simply waiting for her to arrive at the same place. She sat down. He didn't say anything immediately. He got up and poured her a glass of water and set it in front of her and sat back down. He waited. I keep thinking, she said after a moment, that I should push you away. He looked at her. Not because I want to, because it's what makes sense. She looked at the glass of water. You've lost a client. Your business took a hit. There's going to be more. If this piece circulates, if the board story gets picked up, there's going to be more attention on everything around me, including you. She forced herself to look at him directly. You have a daughter, Mason. You have a business you built. You didn't sign up for all of this. He was quiet for a long moment, the kind of quiet that had weight. Can I tell you something? He said. Yes. When Claire died, he said his wife's name the way he always said it, plainly, without apology for the weight of it. When she died, I spent about 8 months trying to figure out how to be the right kind of person for Lily without asking anyone for anything. Because asking felt like admitting I couldn't do it. And one day my sister came over and found Lily eating cereal for dinner because I'd forgotten to go to the store. And she said, Mason, you don't get points for doing it alone. He looked at her. I've been thinking about that ever since you told me about November, about how long you carried that alone, about what it cost you. She didn't say anything. I'm not here because I didn't understand what I was walking into, he said. I knew there would be a tension. I knew your life was complicated in ways mine isn't. I've been watching you manage things since November that would have flattened someone else. He leaned forward slightly. I'm not here because it's easy. I'm here because it's you. Those are different reasons, and I need you to understand that they're different. She looked at him for a long moment. Her throat was doing the thing it had done in the hospital, the inconvenient tightening that she'd been managing since she was 24 years old in rooms where showing what you felt meant losing ground. She stopped managing it. I don't know how to do this, she said, and her voice came out differently than usual, lower, stripped of the professional register she wore like a second skin. I don't know how to let someone... I've been alone in the way that matters for so long that I've stopped noticing it, and now I notice it and I don't. She stopped. I don't know how to not ruin it. Mason was quiet for a moment. Then he said, You're not going to ruin it. You don't know that. No, he said, but I know you. And I know that someone who sat with a 9-year-old she'd just met and read the first page of a book for real because she doesn't do things halfway. That person knows how to be in something. She just has to decide to be. The kitchen was very quiet. Somewhere in the apartment, Lily was watching her documentary, the soft sound of the narrator's voice coming through the wall. Brielle looked at Mason across the kitchen table, in the apartment with the drafting tables and the drawings on the refrigerator, and she made the decision. Not a strategic one, not a calculated one, but the other kind. The kind that happened in the body before the mind finished arguing with it. I'm not pushing you away, she said. Good, he said. I mean it. I'm saying it out loud so I can't take it back later. I heard you. His voice was quiet. I'm not going anywhere either. That's also out loud. He sold the boat 3 days later. She didn't find out right away. She found out when his sister Kara called her. The first time Kara had ever called her directly, which meant she'd gotten the number from Mason, which meant he'd given it to her, which meant something, and told her. He had a commissioned sailboat, Kara said. Her voice was different than Brielle had expected, softer, like someone who had decided something. He bought it the year before Claire got sick. He and Claire were going to sail it up to Michigan when Lily was older. He's been paying the marina fees for 4 years, even though he barely uses it. A pause. He sold it last week. He didn't tell you because he didn't want you to feel responsible. Brielle was sitting in the spare room with the morning light. She was very still. Kara, I was wrong about you, Kara said. I want you to know that I know I was wrong. Her voice had the quality of someone paying a debt they'd been carrying. I read things, and I made a picture, and the picture was wrong. My brother is a good man, and he doesn't make mistakes about people, and I should have trusted that earlier than I did. A beat. I'm sorry. Brielle looked at the courtyard through the window. Thank you for calling, she said, and meant it. After she hung up, she found Mason in the kitchen and stood in the doorway and looked at him until he looked up from what he was doing. You sold the boat, she said. He went very still. Why didn't you tell me? He set down what he was holding. He looked at her with the steady expression she knew, but underneath it something more open, less managed. Because I didn't want it to be a thing, he said. It's just a boat. It's not just a boat. Brielle, it was Claire's. She said it carefully, not as a wound, but as a fact. It was yours and Claire's, and you've been keeping it for 4 years, and you sold it, and you didn't tell me, and I need to know why. He was quiet for a long moment. The kitchen was still around them. Because I needed to, he said finally. Not for the money, though that didn't hurt, because I'd been keeping it as, I don't know, a placeholder. And I'm not in a placeholder anymore. He looked at her directly. I'm here, with you, and I needed to put my weight down somewhere real. She stood in the kitchen doorway and felt something happen in her chest that she'd stopped trying to name because the names kept being insufficient. Mason. I'm not asking you to carry that, he said quickly. I'm not putting that on you. I just... Stop. She crossed the kitchen. She took his face in her hands, which was not something she did, not something she'd done with anyone in longer than she could account for. And she looked at him at close range the way she hadn't let herself look at anyone in years. I'm not letting you minimize that, she said. Don't minimize that. He held her gaze. His hands came up to her wrists, not pulling them away, just holding them there, the contact steadying. Okay, he said. I love you, she said. She said it like it had been there for a while, and she was done waiting for the right moment because there was no right moment, and she was 32 years old and had nearly collapsed in front of 300 people and had spent 5 months being afraid of a thing she should have stopped being afraid of much earlier. I'm not going to wait until it's the perfect time to say it, because there isn't one. I love you. That's it. He didn't say it back right away. He wasn't that kind of person. Wasn't the kind of person who reflected things back to you automatically, who said what you needed to hear because you'd said it. She knew that about him. He stood in his kitchen and looked at her for a moment with the look she'd come to understand meant he was taking something seriously, putting his full weight behind it before he opened his mouth. I love you too, he said. I have for a while. I was trying to let you get there at your own speed. She let out a breath that had been, she realized, held for some time. That is very you, she said. I know. He pulled her forward carefully, mindful of the monitoring and the protocols and the fact that Dr. Obie had said no significant physical stress, and held her the way you held something you'd been afraid of losing before you'd even fully understood you had it. You scared me, he said into her hair, quiet and unperformed. In that hospital, you scared me. I know, she said. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry, just don't do it again. I'll do my best. That's all I'm asking. She returned to the office on a Monday morning, 22 days after the Langham. Not at full capacity. Dr. Obie had been specific about the gradient, the monitored return, the half-days for the first 2 weeks. She'd complied with a degree of patience that surprised even herself. though Mason had noted that patience was easier when you had things to come back to. She'd walked past the board members in question at the re-entry meeting and had handled it the way she handled things, directly, without theater, with the full, accurate awareness of what they'd done and what it would cost them over the next 12 months as she rebuilt the narrative and the numbers in the room. She was patient about it in the particular way she was patient about things that mattered, completely and at her own pace. The day she walked back into her office and sat at her desk with the lake below, gray and enormous and utterly indifferent, she called Mason. "I'm back," she said. "How does it feel?" She looked around her office. The clean lines, the view, the desk where she'd built most of what she'd built, the whole 42 floors of a thing she'd made from nothing and refused to let anyone take. "Like mine," she said. "Good." A pause. "Lily says you owe her a bookstore Saturday." "I know. Tell her this weekend. She'll hold you to it." "I know that too." She looked at the lake. The particular lightness was back in her chest. Not the frightening lightness of the summit, but the other kind. The kind she'd first noticed in a car on the way home from a gala before she knew what it was. "Thank you," she said, "for the last 3 weeks." "You don't thank me for that." "I'm thanking you anyway." He was quiet for a moment. "Saturday," he said. "The 3 of us. The bookstore and then that Thai place Lily's been researching for 2 weeks. She has notes? Extensive ones." "I'll be there," Brielle said. She hung up and turned to face her desk, the lake at her back, the company around her and below her and ahead of her. She was tired in a managed way, the right kind of tired, the kind that came from a body in process of repair rather than a body being ignored. She opened her first email of the day and went to work. The year that followed did not move in a straight line. Nobody's life does. But there's a particular kind of person who believes that if they work hard enough and manage carefully enough and stay disciplined enough, they can impose linearity on the parts of life that resist it. Brielle had been that person for 15 years. The year after the Langham taught her, again and not for the last time, that the imposition doesn't hold, and that the places where it breaks are sometimes exactly where the light gets in. She came back to Hawthorne Collective at half capacity and built back to full over 8 weeks, the way Dr. Obie had mapped it. She had the monitoring appointments every 3 weeks, and she went to all of them and reported honestly, which was still something she had to practice rather than something that came naturally. Old habits. But she practiced. The 2 board members who had leaked to the financial blog were named Raymond Chu and Patricia Hale. She knew this with certainty by the end of her first week back, though she'd suspected it for longer. She didn't move quickly on it. She had learned over 15 years that the satisfaction of moving quickly on a betrayal was smaller than the satisfaction of moving correctly. She needed 1 more quarter, needed the numbers to do what she believed they would do, needed the institutional investor base to stabilize before she could afford the signal that a board restructure sent to the market. She waited. She worked. She let the numbers build the case she needed. David Park, in a hallway conversation in June, said, "You know what's different about you right now?" She looked at him. "My medication dosage." He almost smiled. "You're not running scared anymore. You've been running scared since that column came out 18 months ago, defending ground. Now you're just," he shrugged, "building." She thought about that conversation for several days afterward, turned it over at odd hours. She didn't disagree with it. Something had shifted in the months of recovery, in the kitchen table conversations, and the Saturday mornings, and the strange, uncomfortable, ultimately necessary experience of being still long enough to understand what she actually wanted as opposed to what she was protecting. She had been defending territory for so long that she'd forgotten she was allowed to take new ground. She started taking new ground. The Vericore deal closed in July. Nguyen, who'd been circling for 8 months and had used Brielle's medical leave as a reason to stall, came back to the table after the Q2 numbers released and pretended the delay had been about due diligence. She let him pretend. The deal was the deal, and the deal was good. The Q2 numbers were the best in the company's history. She presented them at the quarterly board meeting, standing at the head of the table, and watched the room absorb them, and watched Raymond Chu and Patricia Hale do the specific performance of enthusiasm that people did when the thing they'd bet against had come in. She noted it and filed it and kept her face even. Afterward, Margaret Clifton found her in the hallway. "I want to say something," Margaret said, "and I want to say it plainly." "Please," Brielle said. "I was wrong in how I handled the months before the summit. I was managing optics when I should have been managing people." She held Brielle's gaze with the particular directness of a woman who had been in enough rooms to know that some things needed to be said to your face. "You built this. The numbers in that room are yours, and I should have made it clearer, in the moments when the board was in doubt, that my confidence in you was not contingent on your personal life or your health or anything other than the 15 years of work that got us here." Brielle looked at her for a moment. "I appreciate that, Margaret." "I'm not finished." Margaret's voice was dry. "I'm also going to tell you that if you keep Raymond Chu on this board after what he did, I'm going to lose significant respect for your judgment." Brielle almost laughed. "I'm not keeping Raymond Chu on this board." "Good." Margaret straightened her jacket. "I'll see you Thursday." She walked away, and Brielle stood in the hallway of her own company, 42 floors above the city, and felt the particular satisfaction of a person who has been patient long enough for the room to catch up to what they already knew. Amnitz. Raymond Chu resigned from the board in August, citing personal commitments. Patricia Hale followed in September, citing health reasons, which was not the reason, and everyone knew it was not the reason, and nobody said so. Brielle made no public comment on either departure. She did not need to. The Q2 numbers had said what needed saying. She brought in 2 new board members, a logistics industry veteran who'd been on her list for 3 years and had finally come available, and a woman named Dr. Yemi Adeyemi, who ran a healthcare and wellness enterprise fund, and whose addition to the board was a signal about where the company was going that the market correctly read as forward momentum. David Park called her the day the Adeyemi announcement went out. "Smart," he said. "I thought so. She's going to push you." "I know. That's why I want her." A pause. "You're doing something different," he said. "The board restructure, the Vericore close, the Adeyemi hire. This is a different kind of play than I've seen you make before." "I decided to stop defending ground I already own," she said, and heard him absorb that in the particular way he absorbed things that landed. "Good," he said, which was her word, Mason's word, the word she'd borrowed from the man who used it like a complete sentence. She liked how it felt in her own mouth now. Steady, final, a door closing on the right side of a decision. The firm grew. Mason didn't talk about it as a thing that was happening, the way he didn't talk about most things that were happening until they had already happened. But she watched it the way she watched things she cared about, quietly, from the side, with the professional awareness of someone who understood the mechanics of a business recovering from a setback, and the personal awareness of someone who had watched him sit at that kitchen table in January, absorbing the Langford loss without letting it touch his face. He picked up 2 significant commercial contracts by spring, a mixed-use development on the north side that put the firm's name in the kind of architectural conversation that led to other conversations, and a smaller but more visible project that she suspected and later confirmed had come through a connection she'd quietly made at an industry dinner she attended in March. She didn't tell him she'd made it. He probably figured it out. He didn't raise it, and she didn't explain it, and that was its own kind of language between them. What she couldn't do, and knew she couldn't do, was buy his way back to where he'd been before Langford. He wouldn't have accepted it, and she wouldn't have offered it, and they both understood that what he was building had to be built on his own terms, or it would be built wrong. But she could open a door and let him walk through it in his own way. And she did, and he did. And by summer the firm was not just recovered, but moving. Lily, who had opinions about everything and made no exception for her father's professional life, declared in June that the North Side project was really good, actually, after Mason showed her the renderings, which Brielle understood to be about the highest form of praise the 9-year-old, 10 now, since March, after a birthday party at the apartment that involved an unreasonable number of her school friends, 2 cakes, and a particular chaos that Brielle had managed with a composure that surprised even herself. Extended. 10-year-old Lily was, if anything, more opinions and more energy than 9-year-old Lily, which Brielle had not believed was possible and had been proven wrong about. She had moved on from the boat book to a period of intense interest in marine biology, followed by a period of intense interest in the political structure of ancient Rome, followed by a current period of intense interest in competitive chess, about which she had sent Brielle 3 different articles and one very long voice note explaining the strategic principles of the Sicilian defense. Brielle had listened to the entire voice note twice. She had also, quietly, signed Lily up for a chess club at the Chicago Cultural Center, having first confirmed with Mason that this was a thing that would land well rather than a thing that would feel like being managed. "She's going to want to go every week," Mason warned. "I know. She's going to want you to come watch sometimes." "I know that too." He looked at her. "You sure you—" "Mason?" She said his name the way he said hers. Just that. Just the name, carrying all the weight of what it meant. "I'm sure." "Yes." Autumn in Chicago came in hard that year, which was the usual way. The lake turning that particular cold weather color, the wind off the water doing what it did. Brielle moved through it differently than she'd moved through the autumn before. Not faster, not with more control, but with more weight. The weight of someone who had put down roots deep enough to hold against the wind. She was back to full capacity by September, which was a negotiation with Dr. Obese that lasted 3 appointments and involved Brielle arguing that the company's Q3 pipeline required her full attention and Dr. Obese responding that her heart's requirements were not negotiable by reference to Q3 pipeline demands. They had reached an agreement that satisfied neither of them entirely, which Dr. Obese said was probably the correct outcome. Her health was stable, not cured. There was no curing what she had, which was something she'd made her peace with in the long, slow months of the spring recovery, with Mason in the kitchen and Lily on the couch, and the spare room with its morning light teaching her, against significant resistance, how to live inside a life that had limits. Managed, monitored, real. She took her medications and kept her appointments and told the people who needed to know. She had stopped carrying it alone, and the weight of it was different when it was distributed. Not gone, but different. The difference between something you dragged and something you wore. She told her senior leadership team in October. Not all of it. Not the full history, not the 4 years of careful concealment, but the fact of it. The condition, the management, the plan. She did it in a room of 12 people who had built this company alongside her and who deserved to know, and she watched their faces in the particular way she watched things, for what they were feeling beneath what they showed. What she saw was not what she'd been afraid of. There was concern, yes. There was the brief recalibration of people absorbing new information about someone they'd believed they knew completely. But there was also something else, something she hadn't prepared for. A quality of settling, as though a thing they'd sensed and not been able to name had been given its name, and the naming was a relief. Her head of operations, a man named Jerome, who had been with her since year 3, and had the quality of a person who said the important thing rather than the polite thing, spoke first. "How can we make this work better?" he said. "Not are you going to be okay? Not what does this mean for the company? Just, what do we do? How do we do it right?" She looked at him for a moment and felt the thing in her chest that wasn't a medical symptom. "I'll tell you," she said. "That's why we're here." Suts. She moved in with Mason in November. This, too, was not a decision that was made. It was a decision that revealed itself when her apartment's lease renewal came up, and she sat with the renewal documents and looked at them for 2 days, and could not make herself sign them because the apartment with the clean lines and the lake view and nobody else's opinion in it felt, for the first time in years, like the wrong shape. She'd been keeping a set of clothes at Mason's since April. She'd been keeping a second toothbrush there since May. Lily had given her a drawer, literally, had led her to the dresser in the hallway and opened the second drawer from the top and said, "This one is yours," with the finality of someone who had made an executive decision and was informing the relevant parties. She put her lease up for subletting and called a mover and spent a Sunday in the Andersonville apartment watching the 3 of them, herself, Mason, Lily, negotiate the physics of integrating her things with their things, which was a negotiation that involved Lily having strong opinions about where the bookshelves went, and Mason having equally strong opinions about the kitchen organization, and Brielle discovering for the first time in her adult life that having someone else's opinions in her space did not, in fact, diminish it. It made it warmer. It made it more itself. She thought about the 24-year-old who had been told she would have to choose. She thought about all the years she'd arranged her life to be navigable alone. She thought about a charity gala and a broken glass, and a man who'd asked if she wanted him to move and hadn't moved when she said no. She unpacked her books into the shelf Lily had designated acceptable and felt the specific, unglamorous, quietly enormous satisfaction of a thing being in its right place. The company's annual celebration was held in the first week of December, as it had been every year since Hawthorne Collective went public. The venue was the same as always, the main atrium of their Michigan Avenue headquarters, the building that Brielle had selected 10 years ago because it had natural light and a floor plan that didn't make people feel like they were working in a machine. The atrium held all 3,000 employees across the multi-floor open space, the upper floors looking down, the lobby level set up for the ceremony. This year's celebration was different in shape. The Q2 and Q3 numbers had given it a different quality. Not just the usual year-end acknowledgement, but something with more air in it, the particular energy of a company that had come through something and knew it. She'd felt it in the building since September, the specific shift in a room's temperature when the people in it have collectively survived a hard thing and are on the other side. She'd planned her remarks for 3 weeks. She'd written them out and cut them back and written them again, because what she wanted to say was harder than the usual year-end address, the numbers and the wins and the forward outlook. What she wanted to say was something more honest than that, more human than that, and she had to find the language for it that didn't tip into performance. She found it. She knew she'd found it the evening before, sitting at the kitchen table while Mason read across from her, and Lily did homework in her room, and the apartment held the three of them in its warm, slightly too many bookshelves domestic reality, and she read the page she'd written and thought, yes, that's it. Mason had asked what she was working on. My remarks for tomorrow, she'd said. He'd looked at her across the table. You gonna be okay? Yeah, she'd said. I think I really am. Yet. The atrium was full at 10 in the morning, all 3,000 of them, the upper floors lined with people who hadn't found seats, the lobby level packed in the way it only got for the annual celebration and for emergencies. Different energy on those 2 days. She knew both kinds. She stood at the podium on the lobby level, the whole building rising above her, and looked out at the people who had shown up every day for this company and felt the specific weight of what she was about to say. She told them the year had been hard. She said it plainly because they knew it and she wasn't going to dress it up. She told them about the numbers, Q2, Q3, the Vericore close, the board restructure, the new hires, the pipeline that was going into the new year stronger than any previous January. She told them what the company was worth now, and she watched the room absorb the number with the particular kind of satisfaction that belonged to people who had worked to produce it. And then she paused, and she told them something else. She told them that last spring she had collapsed in a hotel ballroom in front of 300 investors. She told them about the condition she'd been managing and not talking about. She told them she'd hidden it because she'd believed that showing the weight she carried would make them carry it too, and that she'd been wrong about that, and that the wrongness of it had cost her, and had cost the people closest to her in ways she was still accounting for. The atrium was very quiet. 3,000 people, and the building holding all of them, and the kind of silence that isn't empty. She told them that the thing she understood now, which she had not understood well enough before, was that a company was not a machine. It was people. People who had their own weights, their own conditions, their own things they were carrying and not talking about, because they believed that showing those things would make them smaller in rooms that required them to be large. She told them she'd spent 15 years being the example of a woman who did not need anything she couldn't provide herself, and she told them she was done being that example because it was a lie, and it was a lonely one, and it had almost cost her everything. She told them she wanted this to be a place where people could tell the truth about what they were carrying. She told them the infrastructure for that was already being built. The expanded health and wellness program, the mental health resources, the new flexible work structures her HR team had been developing for 6 months. She told them these were not gestures. They were the work of a company deciding what kind of company it was going to be. She looked out at the 3,000 faces looking back at her and she said, "You are why this company is worth anything at all. Not the numbers, not the deals, you. And you deserve to work somewhere that knows the difference between your output and your worth, and I am going to spend the next 15 years making sure this is that place." The room was quiet for a moment after she finished. And then Jerome, from somewhere in the middle of the lobby-level crowd, started clapping. Not polite applause, the real kind. The kind that starts before it's supposed to start because someone can't help it. And it spread the way real things spread, floor by floor, the upper levels joining, and the sound of it filled the atrium and bounced off the glass and the steel and came back down changed, warmer, more itself. She stood at the podium and let it happen, which was not something she was good at. She was better at managing responses than receiving them. But she was trying to be better at it, and she stood there and let the room be what it was. In the third row, Mason was standing with the rest of them, clapping with the straightforward enthusiasm of a man who didn't perform things. Beside him, Lily, who had been brought to the event because Lily had asked very specifically and persistently whether she could come, and Brielle had said yes, partly because she wanted her there, and partly because you did not tell Lily Reed no when she had decided something. Was on her toes trying to see over the adults around her, her face doing the thing it did when she was watching something she found significant. That particular, unfiltered attention, all the way in. Brielle found their faces in the crowd the way she found the things that mattered. Instinctively, without effort, the way her eyes went to what they'd decided was home. She stepped back from the podium. She didn't know it was coming. That was the thing she said afterward, when people asked. And people asked because it became the kind of thing people asked about, the kind of moment that lived in stories. She genuinely didn't know. She had been with Mason for 14 months, and she knew him well enough to know that he didn't stage things, didn't build toward moments, didn't have that particular theatrical gene that made some people construct the perfect setup. He did things when he felt them. He said things when they were true. The timing was always his own and never anyone else's expectation. After the formal ceremony, the celebration moved to the hosted lunch in the atrium's open sections, food stations, clusters of people, the looser, warmer part of these events when the agenda was done and people were just themselves. She'd been moving through the room the way she always moved through rooms she'd organized, checking in with people, receiving the specific congratulations of a room that had heard something real and wanted to acknowledge it, being present in the way she'd spent the last year learning to actually be present rather than managing presence. She'd found her way back to Mason and Lily, who had acquired a plate of food each and were standing near one of the atrium's support columns. Lily was telling Mason something about the speech. She was pointing at him in the way she pointed when she was explaining something important and expected to be taken seriously, which was always. She was 3 feet away from them when Mason looked up and saw her coming, and something changed in his face. Not a performance, not a staged settling, but the thing that happened involuntarily when you saw someone you'd decided about. She saw it and felt it and kept walking toward them. "Good speech," Lily said immediately when she arrived. "Thank you." The part about the company being people, not a machine, that was the best part. Lily took a bite of something. "You should have led with that." "Lily," Mason started. "No, she's right," Brielle said. "I thought about leading with it. I decided to build to it." She looked at Lily. "Was the build too slow?" Lily considered. "A little, but the ending was good, so it worked out." Mason looked at Brielle over Lily's head with the expression of a man who had made peace with the fact that his daughter was going to be smarter than him about some things. And then he set his plate down on the ledge of the column beside him. He did it with the deliberate quality of someone creating space for what came next. And she noticed it, but didn't know what it meant yet. Not quite. He turned back to her. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. He had not, she realized later, been wearing this jacket the last time she'd seen it. He'd changed before the event. The jacket fit correctly. Not like the tuxedo at the gala, not slightly wrong in the shoulder, but correctly, the way something fit when someone had paid attention. She noticed this after. In the moment, she noticed his face. He was nervous. That was what she saw. Not performing nerves, not the kind of nervous that was actually excitement wearing a costume, but actually genuinely nervous. The hand not quite steady as it came out of his pocket. The breath he took before he spoke, that was the breath of someone who had been preparing something and had arrived at the moment of no longer preparing it. "I've been carrying this since July," he said. He opened the box. She looked at it. It was a ring. Simple, exactly as it should be. A band with a single stone that caught the atrium light. Nothing that announced itself, everything that meant itself. She looked at it and felt the world do something to its edges. "I wasn't going to do this here," he said, and his voice had that rawness in it, the unmanaged kind, the kind she'd heard the night he'd said, "You scared me," and the morning he'd said, "I love you," and all the other moments when he stopped not performing. "I had a plan. It was a good plan. A dinner, a thing I'd worked out. But I've been watching you all morning. I watched you give that speech, and I watched this room respond to you, and I thought..." He stopped. He looked at her. "I've been waiting for the right moment for 5 months, and I don't think there is one. I think there's just now. And now is when I want to ask." Around them, the room had gone quiet in the specific way rooms went quiet when they understood something was happening. The gradually spreading recognition, the instinctive hush. Lily, beside them, had gone absolutely still, her plate forgotten. Mason said, "You're the most difficult, most honest, most remarkable person I have ever met. You nearly broke my heart last April in a hospital room. You've made Lily happier than I've seen her since she was too small to carry her own backpack. You've made me feel like someone who is in the right place. And I know that our life is complicated. And I know there are things we are always going to be managing, and I know it is never going to be easy, and I am asking you anyway, because the easy version doesn't have you in it, and I don't want it." His voice was steady by the end of it. He'd found the steadiness she associated with him, the specific planted quality of a man who had decided. "Brielle Hawthorne," he said, "will you marry me?" The atrium was so quiet she could hear the building. She was not going to cry. She had decided years ago in rooms and boardrooms and the long discipline of public life that she was not going to be a person who cried in front of people. She had maintained this discipline through significant provocation. She looked at Mason Reed, this man who had broken a glass and asked if she wanted him to move and told her hard things plainly, and sat beside her hospital bed with her hand in both of his and sold a boat he'd been keeping for a dead woman's memory because he was done living in placeholders. And she let the discipline go. She was not a graceful crier. She had never been one. Her face did the thing it did when something arrived too large for the usual channels, the way it had done in the car after the gala when the window was cracked, in the kitchen when he'd said we're not doing that anymore, in the spare room when Kara had called about the boat. The tears came before she could manage them, and she did not manage them. "Yes," she said. It came out rougher than she meant, lower, more broken open, the voice of a person who had not been planning to sound like this in front of 3,000 employees and was past caring. "Yes. Obviously, yes." He stood up. He put the ring on her finger with the hands that were still not completely steady, and she let him, and she put her hand against his face the way she'd done in the kitchen months ago, and he put his forehead against hers, and neither of them said anything for a moment because neither of them needed to. Lily made a sound beside them, a short, slightly strangled sound that was not her usual sound, and Brielle pulled back and looked at her. And Lily Reed, who was 10 years old and opinionated about everything, and had given Brielle a drawer and read her the first page of a book before she'd decided to trust her, had tears running down her face with the expression of someone who was furious at herself for crying and was doing it anyway. "I'm not crying," Lily said, which was the most inaccurate sentence she had ever produced. "I know," Brielle said, and pulled her in. Lily grabbed her around the middle with both arms, the grip of someone who had been waiting for something to hold and had decided this was it. Mason put his arm around both of them. For a moment they were just that, just the three of them, in the middle of the atrium, in the middle of the room, in the middle of a life they'd built out of a broken glass and a 9-year-old's research project and a Saturday morning in a cafe. And then the room came back. Jerome started it again because Jerome always started the real things. And it spread the way it had spread before. Floor by floor, the upper levels leaning over the railings, the 3,000 people who had come to a company celebration and stayed for something they hadn't anticipated, and the sound of it was different from the applause after the speech. That had been for the work. This was for something else, something harder to name, the response of people who had been watching two human beings choose each other and had been moved by the choosing. Brielle stood in the middle of her company and her family and the beautiful, irreducible mess of a life she had not planned and had built anyway. And she looked up at the floors above her, at the faces of people who had shown up, and she thought about the woman who had walked up the Opera House steps 14 months ago, feeling every glance, absorbing every silence, carrying her condition and her company and her loneliness with the practiced ease of someone who had decided that carrying things alone was the price of being who she was. She thought about everything that woman had believed, about choosing, about the room she'd moved through on her own terms, at her own cost, managing the exits so she'd never have to see anyone leave because she'd never let them close enough to leave from. She thought about what it had cost her and what it had given her, and what it would have cost her to keep paying it. She looked at Mason, who was looking at her with the look she knew, the steady, planted, fully present look of a man who had put his weight down in one place and was not moving. She looked at Lily, who had pulled back far enough to look at the ring on Brielle's hand with the expression of a person conducting a serious assessment and finding the results satisfactory. "It's a good ring," Lily said, with the tone of someone issuing a verdict. "Yes," Brielle said. "It is." "I helped pick it," Lily said. Mason looked at the ceiling. "July," Brielle said. "July," Lily confirmed. "We went to 4 stores. He kept saying he wasn't sure, and I kept telling him that was because he was looking at the wrong ones." She looked at Brielle directly with those dark eyes that had been assessing her since a bookstore on a November morning. "I knew which one was right." "How?" Brielle asked. Lily thought about it for a moment. "Because it didn't try too hard," she said. "It just was what it was." Brielle looked at this 10-year-old who had drawn floor plans on napkins and given strangers drawers, and cried while insisting she wasn't crying, and found the right ring in the 4th jewelry store in July. And she felt the thing in her chest that she'd been trying to name since the first Saturday morning in the cafe. The warmth and the weight of it. The specific quality of a love that had come in through the side door while she wasn't watching for it. "You are remarkable," she said to Lily. "I know," Lily said. "Dad says it constantly." "He's right," Mason said quietly. "I'm standing right here." "I know," Brielle and Lily said at the same moment in the same tone, and then looked at each other, and Lily laughed, the real laugh, the one that happened before she could manage it, the one she'd inherited from her father. The atrium was warm around them. The people of the company she'd built moved through the space, some watching them, most now back in their own conversations. The celebration continuing in the way celebrations continued. The formal moment absorbed into the ongoing ordinary life of 3,000 people and a December morning and a future that was already beginning. There is something people get wrong about stories like this one. They look at the ending, the ring, the tears, the applause, the woman who came back stronger, and they see a story about triumph, a story that says, if you survive the hard thing, you get the good thing. If you hold on long enough, the room changes. But that's not what this story is. Or not only what it is. Brielle Hawthorne did not get Mason Reed because she was a billionaire CEO who survived a health crisis and a board betrayal. She got him because one evening at a hospital, with an IV in her arm, she finally told the truth to someone who was sitting close enough to hear it. Because she stopped carrying things alone, not because she had to, but because she decided to. Because she learned, imperfectly, against resistance, on a very slow schedule, the difference between strength that keeps people out and strength that lets them in. Mason Reed did not fall in love with a powerful woman who made him look good in rooms. He fell in love with a person who read the first page of a book for real, who kept granola bars in her bag for a child who wasn't hers, who sat in a hospital bed and said, "I should have told you," with the voice of someone who knew what it had cost her not to. He fell in love with the specific, flawed, effortful, genuine person underneath the management. And Lily, who had been watchful and careful and carrying things since she was 5 years old, and the world rearranged itself without her permission, had decided in a bookstore on a November morning that this was a person worth letting in. Not because Brielle was impressive, because Brielle had paid attention. The world is full of people telling you who is worth your time, who deserves your consideration, who should be in which rooms, carrying which things, loving which people. It has opinions about your body and your choices and your timing and your worth, and it delivers those opinions in the comment sections and the charity galas and the boardrooms and the gossip columns of our particular moment with the confidence of entities that have earned nothing and understand nothing about the actual texture of a human life. The world told Brielle she was a joke, The world told Mason he was a gold digger. The world watched two imperfect, wounded, genuinely trying people choose each other and decided it was their business to weigh in. It wasn't. It never was. What matters in the end is not the room's verdict. The room doesn't know what you've carried. The room doesn't know what you've paid. The room did not sit beside you in the dark and hold your hand and stay. The people who stay because they want to, because they've decided you're worth the complication, because they've looked at the full thing and not the curated version and chosen you anyway. Those people are the answer to the question that rooms full of expensive opinions can never answer. Who are you when you stop performing for the crowd? Brielle knew the answer now. She was a woman who cried in front of 3,000 employees and didn't manage it, who kept granola bars in her bag, who said yes, obviously yes, in a voice that sounded like herself. That was the whole of it. That was enough. That was, in fact, everything. The photographs from the celebration made the rounds in the way. Photographs made the rounds. Fast, slightly out of context, reduced to caption. But there was one that landed differently. Someone on one of the upper floors had taken it from above, looking down. The three of them in the middle of the atrium, the crowd around them, the moment just after. Mason's arm around both of them. Lily's face turned up toward Brielle's. Brielle's hand against Mason's chest. The caption on the most shared version was simple. Someone had written it without trying too hard. This is what choosing looks like. It spread the way true things spread. Not because it was loud, but because it was accurate. Because people recognized something in it that they knew from their own lives, from their own moments of standing in a room and deciding that the opinion of the crowd was less important than the person beside them. The woman who had walked up the Opera House steps 14 months ago, feeling every glance, had become this woman. Not because the world changed its mind, but because she had. She stopped performing for a room that had never deserved the performance. She let herself be found. And the person who found her was a man who had broken a glass at a charity gala and laughed like he meant it, and a little girl who gave strangers drawers and knew which ring was right because it didn't try too hard. It just was what it was, and it was everything.